Hello, we are so excited for you to be joining us here at the High Impact Conference, June 2022. Our session is called Creating, Sustaining, and Supporting a Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive School Climate. You will be lucky to hear from my friends and colleagues, Krista, Allison, Patti, Fetzer, and Carole Sutton, and I'm Colleen Kornish. We work at State Support Team 9 and the Stark County ESC. And now I'm going to turn it over to Patti to go over our goals.
Welcome. And our goals for today are to facilitate a focused session on creating, sustaining, and supporting a diverse, equitable, and inclusive school climate where everyone belongs by defining a safe and supportive and inclusive learning environment, providing resources, tools, and strategies to support conversations with colleagues, students, families within their school and district community, and applying the DEI+B, that's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategies within your educator roles and your learning environments.
We do have some resources for you to help you meet those goals. So we're hoping that our session today will help you, but we know that you may need some more learning to go along with what we talk about today. So we do have some things for you. There is the slide deck. We do have a PDF of that in your session folder. There's also a processing document, and you may want to pause this recording now and print that out or make a digital copy of it, just so you have a place to jot down your thoughts as we go through our presentation here. We also have a flexible learning options document that has different resources for you to extend your learning if you want to learn more about these topics, or perhaps you want to have some conversations with colleagues. You would be able to look at the resources that we have here to maybe start those conversations. And then we also have the video library through ClassroomWise, and that has a variety of resources for you to explore as well.
Defining a safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environment. Well, we all know that all students, including students from historically marginalized populations, have the right to quality, equitable education in a safe, supportive, and inclusive school. We know that every student, regardless of their race, religion, ability, or socioeconomic status, can reach their full potential when the school environment is one in which they feel truly valued, safe, and supported. So we want you to keep those words in mind today. Truly valued, safe, and supported. It's something that we all want. So how are we getting there? So I'm going to walk you through kind of the blueprint of how this all got started and why we're having this conversation today. Well, in 2019, 3 major reports were released by the Ohio Department of Education demonstrating its commitment to creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive school climate. The first, and you'll see all of these on your screen, is Each Child, Our Future. It's the foundational guide for the work of the Ohio Department of Education and the State Board of Education. Its language and shared vision shape our daily actions and inform the ways we strive to serve Ohio's education community. The mission is bold yet unifying, and together we share a common vision for our children, that they are challenged to discover and learn, prepared to pursue a fulfilling post-high school path, and empowered to become resilient, lifelong learners who contribute to society. The second document, you'll see here in the middle, also was produced in 2019 by the Ohio Department of Education. It was released as a brief and a task force recommendation entitled Diversifying the Education Profession. What happened is that they recognized the critical importance of a diverse educator workforce and employing more educators who look and have similar experiences to students in our districts and schools. And they said that this is a priority of not only the Ohio Department of Education, but the Ohio Department of Higher Education and Ohio's pre-kindergarten through grade 16 educational institutions. So they thought, well, to achieve this equity and provide for an effective learning environment for all students, we need authentic representation of student populations because that's key. They looked at research that was shared in the brief by Villegas and Irvine back in 2010, and they said, here's what we know. that there are both academic and social emotional benefits to students of color taught by teachers of color. Benefits for students of color included gains in test scores, more likely to stay in high school, increased intentions of going to college, more likely to take college entrance exams, less likely to be chronically absent, and less likely to experience discipline incidents. So this truly was an important report. To achieve equity and provide an effective learning environment for all students, authentic representation of the student population is key. The third document, which is the last, is building on Each Child, Our Future, and this modeled the partnership that Ohio was positioned to improve learning experiences and outcomes for all children. The report, entitled Each Child Means Each Child, provided a roadmap to ensure students with disabilities would receive education and services necessary for success. School and district data were consistent, and they showed that gaps in academic performance and graduation rates of students with disabilities compared to those of non-disabled peers was key. We know that through Each Child, Our Future, that Ohio is committed to meeting the needs of the whole child, which is an opportunity to ensure positive and meaningful educational experiences for students with disabilities that will lead to academic and post-secondary success. All three of these documents can be found in that flow document that was mentioned by Colleen earlier. Next slide, please. So let's take a closer look at Each Child, Our Future and this conversation around whole child framework. You may have heard a little bit about this, or you might have even seen these documents referenced in previous conversations with state support team or Ohio Department of Education administrators. As you can see, Ohio's strategic plan for education is called Each Child, Our Future, and it puts the whole child at the center, where each component of the plan works basically in harmony to support a whole child approach. Likewise, Ohio's whole child framework also places the whole child at the center, with district, school, family, and community supporting the needs of the whole child using a comprehensive approach. A whole child approach broadens the district and school focus beyond academics to include meeting students' social, emotional, physical, and safety needs. What we know to be true is that if a child is not holistically in place to learn, they're not going to learn. It's really three legs to the stool, as we used to say. You need the student, the schools, and the families, but you need that child to be whole. Next slide. Ohio's strategic plan for education, Each Child, Our Future, puts the whole child, as you can see, at the center, where each component of the plan works basically in harmony to support a whole child approach. Likewise, Ohio's whole child framework also places the whole child at the center as well. A whole child approach broadens districts and school focus beyond academics to include meeting students' social, emotional, physical, and safety needs. Now, as we continue to move forward, you're going to see that there are 5 tenets of the whole child framework, commonly held beliefs reflecting the desired conditions which lead to success in life and learning. When students are healthy and they feel safe, they're supported through strong systems and relationships, they're challenged and experience success, they engage in learning that's relevant and meaningful, they are more likely to enjoy learning, develop positive social skills, and achieve greater success. Through a thoughtful and systemic approach, students can thrive in schools, and we know that to best coordinate resources, districts should coordinate policy, processes, and practices, practice cultural responsiveness, deliberately focus on equity, and dedicate time and resources to structured continuous improvement. Now, we're going to flip to this next slide, and this is going to show you some components of school and health support systems. I'll walk you through just a few. Healthy behaviors, which you'll see listed there, and that's in that darker shade. Supporting healthy behaviors gives students knowledge and skills to make decisions that positively impact their health and social emotional well-being. Schools engage students in health education, physical education, and social emotional lessons and activities from pre-kindergarten through high school. In the next section, you'll see services to students and families. Schools provide services to meet students' nutrition and physical and behavioral health needs. Services are tiered and support the needs of individual students and the student body as a whole. In that next section, you'll see engaging others. Students benefit from knowing that they're surrounded by caring adults in schools, at home, and within the community at large. Schools engage with families and communities to best align efforts to support the students' needs. And finally, safe and supportive school environments. Students learn best and thrive in safe and supportive school environments. And we know that the components of those environments include, and if you'll see this from our next slide, creating a positive school climate, addressing culture, students' emotional, physical safety, and ensuring that the school's physical environment and grounds are safe. Now, in this last slide that we're going to show you, this kind of pulls it all together. It's really a community-wide effort, everyone. It's not just about one, but all, everyone, not just those in schools, but everybody shares this responsibility of preparing a child for their successful future. Addressing the needs of each child starts with parents and caregivers, and that's represented by that maroon circle, and extends to schools and other government and community partners that serve children, and that's represented by that gold band that you see there. So think about this. It really is a village effort. It's not a solo, but a village effort. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about this positive school climate and how is this linked to all of what we've been sharing with you? Well, positive school climate has been linked to several important outcomes, including increased self-esteem and self-concept, improved student engagement, decreased absenteeism, reduced behavioral problems, and disciplinary actions, in-school detention, out-of-school suspension, and increased graduation. Here's what we know. A positive school climate helps everybody feel safe, engaged, and supported and connected, which is critical for student success when in the classroom. We know that districts determine school climate through implementation of policies and practices that prevent challenging issues, that address the impact that students may have, trauma on a student, or even it helps adults respond more effectively. You've all talked about classroom management, and you've probably had several conversations regarding that over the last year. Well, what we know is that a positive school climate not only helps the student, it helps everyone. Now, there's some additional areas to keep in mind when we think about creating and maintaining a positive school climate. That includes cultivating positive relationships among students and school staff, regularly using data to assess the needs of students so that you can actually understand where they're at, partnering and collaborating with families to create continuity between the home and the learning environment, providing for staff wellness, morale, and retention. That's also important. And probably I'd like to think the most important of all, because it's who we serve, our customer, the student, knowing and engaging the students and understanding their voice. It's an important piece to school climate improvement work. I'll turn it over to Patti, who's going to tell us a little bit about our why. Patti?
Thank you, Krista. And yes, we need to get to our why. We are still coming up for air as educators and caring citizens following a dual pandemic that brought greater attention to the health and education disparities and led to significant and challenging discourse about the why. In fact, as we're taping this session, we all have very heavy hearts the day after the Texas elementary school shooting. Why do we need to focus attention on ensuring safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environments? Why can't we just return to normal? Why are some of our student populations struggling more than others? Why are these conversations so difficult? We encourage you to dig deeper into the data to give you your strong picture of your why. Next slide.
Thank you, Patti, for setting that stage. We all might be thinking, why am I feeling this way? Where is some of this tension and this coming from? Well, there are many factors that we're going to be discussing today. But what are those factors and why is this discussion so important? Well, after the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, many workplaces, including schools, began initiatives or even continue to just express those initiatives aimed at countering racism and bias. According to Education Week, conversations around racism, bias, and sexism have become a minefield for educators. Some states have or are considering limiting how teachers can discuss racism and sexism. The map that you see there has been updated and it's reflective of May of 2022. And it shows that since January of 2021, 42 states have introduced bills or taken other steps that will restrict teaching critical race theory or limit how teachers can discuss racism and sexism. 17 states have imposed these bans and restrictions either through legislation or avenues. But the thing is that what is critical race theory? We've heard schools and districts say schools don't teach critical race theory, which they don't. But let's take a look at this short video that discusses what is critical race theory, just so you can have this as a reference. Colleen?
If you Google critical race theory today, you're likely to encounter a slew of misinformation and fear-mongering from the right.
Critical race theory is a Marxist doctrine that rejects the vision of Martin Luther King Jr.
Just because I do not want critical race theory taught to my children in school does not mean that I'm a racist.
CRT looks beyond individual acts of racism and bigotry and instead grapples with the structures and histories that have embedded racism into law and more broadly into society. Developed by a diverse group of anti-racist legal scholars in the 70s and 80s, critical race theory is a practice, a way of seeing connections between America's racial history and present-day inequality. We can't fight for racial justice if we can't see, speak, and learn about racial injustice.
What are our students telling and showing us? Taking time to really listen to the experience of your students will be your why. Their lived experiences and their voices are so authentic and so impactful. Students stand ready to serve as full partners in solutions, partners with energy and ideas that will actually make your jobs easier. We have included these videos and other resources that provide the voice and experience of young people within your session folder. Let's take a moment to listen to some of their impactful voices.
People need to listen to students of color. And I think that this is a big thing, even just in our society, is that like, as people of color and as youth, we know what we need. Like, we don't need teachers to tell us what we need. So I think that the most important thing is to like, give us a seat at the table, give us an opportunity to tell you like, this is what we need, this is what we want to improve our schools.
If you as a school know that, you have a problem in terms of race and treating minorities in your school and not being as equal and fair to them, then you need to look internally and see what you can fix, and you need to address it thoroughly and not quickly.
Sometimes students aren't really heard. Some of their ideas are shut down, and I feel like that's not helpful, because at the end of the day, it's like the students going to the school, going through these things, and they're going home, living their own personal lives, and it reflects in their academic life sometimes too. So like listening to the students and actually like implementing that would be helpful. I think like that could start with just like a simple like opening up to like a discussion. You
as a principal or counselor should know what's wrong in your school. So looking in internally and reflecting and saying, all right, these are some complaints we've been having, or this is what I see that's wrong in the school. Take your time and try and fix it. And really take your time and try and fix it, because you owe it to those students that are at your school every single day.
Just by being honest and like being real with the students and not being willing to like shy away from like the stuff, like, because we all watch the news, we all are all on social media, so we see everything that's going on. So if they're more honest and more willing to talk about it and like even willing to like answer questions or even talk about like the stuff on the news, like I feel like that would do justice in the schools.
There needs to be like reformed school policies around microaggressions. I think there are things that students say to other students that while, as my administration said, are not discrimination because they didn't say it to you, are definitely things that are wrong. So I think just reforming those policies, but also making sure that there's some restorative justice in there. So suspending a kid for 3 days because they said the N-word, I don't know how much that will achieve, or talking to them in the office or putting them in safe. But if you actually took the time to teach that student why you can't say the N-word and make them more cognizant of that, I think that there are a lot of students that if they really understood why those words are inappropriate, they wouldn't use them anymore.
To make Black students feel safe and supported, I think that some teachers might have to get out of their comfort zone and talk to a student all right, this is what it is, and how can I as a teacher understand where you're coming from?
We need more people in the counseling aspect. And that's not even just mental health support, but also help with college applications and job applications and career things. That's so important. And I think that's one thing that people aren't getting, and they're getting in trouble, and then they don't have these skills and they don't know how to do it. They're not seeing people who look like them that have succeeded.
Once you get to high school, there are a lot of other systematic things that have played out that might cause students to be at different levels. I think that there needs to be a lot more done to make sure that students get put in the right rigor of classes, and also to make sure that general classes are not just remedial.
The stuff that really matters is how to live, and also for how to be beneficial to yourself, especially as a colored person. What I mean by that is we need to learn how to, we don't get to learn to pay taxes. We don't get to learn how to do these type of, learn how to pay bills. We need to learn life skills.
History needs to be taught on the ethnic background of the school. If the school is majority Black and Hispanic, more Black history and Hispanic history should be taught, because that also has to do with a confidence level too. Because if we read in history and we don't see Blacks doing things that we see whites doing, then we won't have the courage to go out there and try it for ourselves.
In this next video, we'll give some voices from our LGBT students and their experiences.
School for me is scary. It's not fun. I dread going to school every morning and being in a classroom full of people who do not share the same interests and values that I do.
It's scary because I don't know how people are going to perceive me when I dress a certain way, or if I present myself a certain way to different people.
School is hard, but it will prevail. I have faith in that.
We have had students throw food at us, and we've had students who were on the football team quit the football team because of bullying and harassment.
We had a problem with our day of silence because there was basically some people who decided that it was right to deface our posters and yell at people who were participating in a day of silence.
I was involved in freshman orientation, and I was actually one of the head ambassadors out of 150 students. I got my privileges revoked because some parent of one of the kids that was in my group called the school and complained that I was their leader and that I was not fit to be a student leader. So it's just really hard.
I got involved with GLSEN because I felt that the message that it has is really positive, and I want to help spread it around.
I started my Gay Straight Alliance because I felt that students needed to be aware that there were LGBT students, and to provide support for any LGBT student that might have needed it.
We've come a long way in regards to gay rights and equality, but I feel like there's so much more that we can do, and I think our generation can accomplish a lot of that.
Someday, a kid like me will not go unnoticed per se, but would be able to go through their school district and go through their lives without being nitpicked or bullied.
There's no reason for you to ever be told that you can't do something. And you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until it happens, because it has to happen, and it will.
Thank you, GLSEN supporters, for helping GSAs all over the country.
Thank you, GLSEN supporters, for all the work you've done for LGBT youth.
Because of all your work, I am able to feel safe and happy.
Thank you for supporting GLSEN.
Thank you, GLSEN supporters, for giving me an opportunity to speak my mind and create a voice for myself in itself to create a better future.
You cannot leave a room of hearing voices and ideas from students without being moved and inspired. So thank you for taking time to listen to some voices today. Next slide, please. What is the data telling us? There is significant national, state, local, and district data that paints a picture through numbers, analysis, charts, graphs, and stories that will be your why. For purposes of today's session, we included a small sampling of Ohio data in the next 3 slides that provides some why data for Black, Brown, and LGBTQ students. You can take a deeper dive into more national and state data sources in your session folder. Let's take a moment to look at this slide that comes from Heather Boughton and Eben Dow's May 2021 Ohio Department of Education presentation. What data on this graphic stands out to you? Is it the largest bubble that reveals that while 37.6% of white students experience poverty, 84.3% of Black students are experiencing poverty? Or the smaller bubbles that show us that while 19.2% of white students are identified and served as gifted, only 5.2% of Black students are identified, and only 2.4% actually received gifted services. Next slide, please. This next slide is taken directly from the Ohio Department of Health's 2019 High School Youth Risk Behavior Survey report. They have a similar graph for their middle school report. It reveals to us that our Hispanic students felt significantly more sad and hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row in 2019. Black students also reported experiences of sadness and hopelessness at much higher rates than their white peers. This is pre-pandemic data. A link to this report will be in this session's folder. Next slide, please. This GLSEN school climate snapshot for LGBTQ students tells us that Ohio LGBT students experience anti-LGBTQ remarks and experience victimization and discriminatory practices in their schools. You will find Ohio Youth Risk Survey data that tells us that approximately 50% of high school students who identify as LGBTQ reported having seriously considered suicide in 2019. This report will be in your resource folder. We have provided you with Ohio data, but please don't stop there. Dive into your county, your zip codes, your building, and your district data to go even deeper into your why. Some data source links are provided in the folder to support you on this data journey.
We're going to watch a short video about our need to belong and how important and impactful belonging is for our students. Let's take a look.
Anything else about this weekend, friends?
In the pool, I did a cannonball. I know how to swim.
You know how to swim?
I know. I do. Blow bubbles underwater.
You
Me
do?
too.
As human beings, one of the most essential needs we have is the need to belong. In school, children need a sense of belonging to be able to be productive learners. They need to be connected to their fellow students, connected to their teachers, to also be affirmed in who they are in a way that is positive and accepting.
I don't take swimming lessons.
In a belonging classroom, there's a community being explicitly built. The teacher knows each child and things about each of those children that they can mention and draw on.
I pay attention, I listen.
I'm really invested in what they tell me. The students feeling loved, students feeling nurtured, students feeling like they have a place at school, they're safe. It activates their brain cells.
Sense of belonging is one of the most important activators of a child's engagement in learning. Everything about activating a child's cognitive skills begins with activating their social connectedness. The energy for learning is coming from the social connection that children have.
But in the end, we're trying to come up with an agreement.
Excellent. We're not going to comment, question. We're only going to encourage. Because they're culturally and linguistically diverse students, I want to really make sure that we are making them feel connections. All the writing we do in our class, it's very much about them. It helps them, promotes them to find their own voice and to share their stories.
Sometimes people think every Muslim person is a target or is a terrorist.
Thank you, Anissa.
What did this show us about what we are good at as a group?
Working together, because we often argue a lot.
Today, we did an activity that was really designed to get them thinking about how they're going to support each other. I think that reiterating the idea that we're in this together, I think it's hard to find the time, but doing some team building exercises at the beginning of the year and revisiting them can really help illustrate that point.
In a belonging classroom, they have a community that may meet in classroom meetings to problem solve together, to read stories together, to tell successes and accomplishments or important events together. They celebrate like families do, things that each other have done or have experienced.
Let's talk about what we admire about some of our friends.
I admire Zara because she is so compassionate.
And when we're talking about being compassionate and being supportive of one another, it's to build that deeper connection for everyone, just to feel like this is their school family, this is somewhere they're loved, they're nurtured, they're taken care of, they're valued.
Thank you for speaking.
The community becomes a place where you can bring your emotions, your fears, your needs. You can be honest about what's going on and know that there will be acceptance, support, and love that's available to carry you through.
We all can work together and we all can try to strategize together and create a better pathway for others to be successful. And we can make it fun.
They're working together. They take care of each other, not just personally, but academically.
We're always pushing each other.
We just love that video, and we want you to think about what they talked about in the video and how could you use this to start a conversation with your colleagues about the culture in your school. And do you really have a culture of belonging for your students and for yourselves?
Thanks, Colleen. That was a great video. Now we're going to talk about the what. The what of DEI+B. Next slide, please. So to start those conversations, you have to have some common language. So we've put together some definitions for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to create that common language. They provide a clear understanding of the concepts that are being presented here today. So let's dive in. Diversity, representing individuals, different races, national origins, language, sexual orientation, religions, abilities. In essence, diversity means bringing into the space our lived experiences, our differences, and of course, valuing them. Equity. Equity is different from equality. Equality means everyone's treated the same. They're treated the same regardless of their differences. Whereas equity means everyone's provided with what they need to succeed. One anonymous quote explained, equality is everyone getting the same pair of shoes, but equity means everyone gets a pair of shoes that fits. Inclusion, authentically bringing traditionally excluded individuals and or groups into our processes, our activities, our decision making, our policy making in a way that shares power. And then finally, belonging. Just like the video, we want everyone to feel welcome, included, accepted, heard, valued, respected, safe, and supported. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Thanks, Brené Brown, for that awesome quote. Everybody loves Brené. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Carole. Now let's talk about the where. And this is really simple. Your school. This DEI+B needs to happen everywhere because we all, as human beings, need those safe spaces, and we need our schools to be those safe spaces. And Carole just talked about my girl, Brené Brown, and here's a quote for us to consider. Teachers are the guardians of spaces that allow students to breathe and be curious and explore the world and be who they are without suffocation. Students deserve one place where they can rumble with vulnerability and their hearts can exhale, and our schools need to be that space. Okay, Krista, you're up.
So, Colleen, Patti, Carole, when do we do this? Well, it is now or later, right? We've already stated, we've given you the evidence, we've told you the data. It's now or later, so it's now. You see it circled in red. We can't afford to not have these conversations. We need to activate cultural and social connectedness now. Next slide is going to tell us how.
And everybody's probably wondering how do I do this? Well, we put together some 6 steps that will get you started on your journey. The first step is knowing you. Know who you are, your identity, your values, your blind spots.
Number 2, understand culturally responsive practices. Create an equity-oriented lens in what you see, say, know, and do.
Third, know your students. Know who they are culturally, personally, and know their identity and how they identify themselves.
4, create a psychologically safe space for your students.
5, be inclusive. Make sure everyone has a seat and a voice.
And 6, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is a journey, not a destination.
So let's talk about identity. How do you identify yourself? Are you a father, a son, a mother, a daughter? What's your religious affiliation, your ethnicity, your profession, your personality, or other attributes? Creating a visual will help anchor your identifiers. Some suggestions for how to do this, how to drill down to your core identity could include creating a sentence that describes you, drawing a circle on a piece of paper and writing all of your identifiers inside the circle, or finding another graphic organizer that appeals to you and filling that graphic organizer with your identifiers. However you decide to visualize it, make sure you're grounded in your own identity. Brené Brown says, talking about values, knowing your values is a way of or believing what you hold most important. Effective leaders identify with 2 or 3 core values that truly identify them, not separate professional values or separate personal values, but core values. And then living into your values. How do you live into your values? Our girl Brené has a podcast for that. It's called Living Into Your Values, and that podcast link will be included in our Google resources. Oprah says, don't be confused about between what people say you are and who you know you are. The next thing is talking about our blind spots. The definition of blind spots is best described through a metaphor. It captures those hidden spaces, those hidden notions that we have. Everyone has them, so don't be embarrassed. Everyone has them. But it's important to recognize what your blind spots are so you can identify them, name them, and work to overcome them. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Carole. Those are all really important things to remember. Up next, we want to talk about step 2, and that's making sure that we have culturally responsive practices. And so on the slide, we have a couple of different things to just remind us that really having culturally responsive practices is really based in neuroscience and in the brain. When we don't feel like we are being seen and heard and valued, we're not connecting. And that means your students aren't connecting either if they don't feel that way. And so we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to honor our students and have them feel that way. And that's why it's so important that we have culturally responsive practices. Our students need to be challenged, but they need to be supported. And when you have culturally responsive practices, you have both. You're a warm demander, like Zaretta Hammond says. You set the stage for high expectations for all, and you help every single student get there. And so that's what being a culturally responsive practitioner means, is that you really see and believe that every single one of your students can do it, and you collaborate with them to make sure that they can get there. And that goes right along with honoring your students. And honoring your students is really just simple, because we need to treat others as we would like to be treated. How would you want your own children, if you have children, treated in school? You would want them to be honored and respected, and that's what we need to make sure that all of our students feel that way when they're in school. And I just love this quote by local author, Tisha Fitzgerald. She says that honor pulls out the genius in everyone that's in front of you. And so we really need to look at all of our students and tap into their genius and their potential, and let them know that we believe in them. So that way they believe in themselves and give us their best effort.
Thank you, Colleen, and I completely honor your genius. With this slide, this brings us to psychological safety, which is an essential component of inclusion. Amy Edmondson, an expert on psychological safety from Harvard Business School, tells us that psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with their ideas, their questions, those concerns, or mistakes. She says there are 3 things that we can do to improve psychological safety. The first one is to frame our work, the meaning and the nature of our work. The second one is to model failability. I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to invite opportunities for input through asking a direct question. And the third is to embrace messengers, thank them for their input. Let's take a moment to take a pulse on our environments. Do you have psychological safety in your homes? Do you feel you have psychological safety in your workplace with your colleagues? Do your students experience psychological safety?
We're almost there. We're on step number 5, be inclusive. Inclusivity fosters student engagement. Be intentional about making space for everyone's voice, ideas, and input. If adults feel included, they will likely create similar spaces for student learners. In our next slide, we're going to introduce a protocol for conducting an inclusive meeting. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at this resource from Harvard. We could use this as a model to design our meetings and spaces to be more inclusive. Part of the art of becoming more inclusive is to proactively remove barriers. Let's pause here for just a moment, review this protocol in our resources. This exercise may help us to improve our inclusion by being proactive rather than reactive. In summary, an environment that's accessible to all, be intentional, and communicate expectations. This link will be in our resources.
And finally, as we're thinking about all of the good work that we've talked about today, we know that this is hard work to do. It's hard. And it means that we're going to have to use that extra muscle and mental power to do it. But it also is going to require that we get comfortable being uncomfortable. TED Talker Lovie Jones is a professional troublemaker. And in this TED Talk, she discusses getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're only going to be playing for you the last segment of the clip, but we encourage you to listen to the full segment of this essential TED Talk as you do your work each day. Listen here.
Being yourself can be a revolutionary act. And in a world that wants us to whisper, I choose to yell. When it's time to say these hard things, I ask myself 3 things. 1, did you mean it? 2, can you defend it? 3, did you say it with love? If the answer is yes to all 3, I say it and let the chips fall. That's important. That checkpoint with myself always tells me, yes, you're supposed to do this. Telling the truth, telling thoughtful truth should not be a revolutionary act. Speaking truth to power should not be sacrificial, but they are. But I think if more of us chose to do this for the greater good, we'd be in better spaces than we are right now. Speaking of the greater good, I think we commit ourselves to telling truths to build bridges to common ground. And bridges that aren't based on truth will collapse. So it is our job, it is our obligation, it is our duty to speak truth to power, to be the domino. Not just when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Thank you.
Whew. That makes me want to watch that whole video, Krista.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. We just gave him a little snippet of it. That's all, just a snippet.
I've watched it a few times, but I'm going to go back and watch Lovey because that just gets me every time. Those 3 things. Check in with yourself. And if you can live with it, go for it. I love that.
Yes.
So we do really want to hear where you're at with this and what your thoughts are about our presentation. And it's really important that we take time to reflect upon what we're learning and that we set those intentions and we develop a plan for what we're going to do with the things that we learn. And so we ask that you please take a few moments to do that now. You can scan the QR code. This will also be in our session folder that you will have access to. And it may be additional to the high impact feedback, but we really are interested to find out where you're at with what we've talked about here today. And we're going to end with this quote. You've heard a lot from Brené Brown. As you can tell, we're all fans of her work. And we're going to end with this. But what we can do and what we are ethically called to do as teachers is create a space in our schools and classrooms where all students can walk in and for that day or hour, take off the crushing weight of their armor, hang it on a rack, and be open their heart to truly being seen. And we know that that's the type of environment that you want to create for your students. And we're glad that you're joining us in this journey. Friends, thank you so much. It has been awesome. Krista, Carole, and Patti, thank you for being on this journey with me. And thank you all for joining us and being here with us as well. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We are happy to digest and discuss this with you. Carole, Krista, or Patti, any final words?
Just thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all you do. We know this is hard work and a heavy lift, but we so appreciate you. You are valued, you are seen, and you're loved. Thank you.
Being culturally competent, it's not a destination, it's a journey. So I welcome you to walk with us. And I'm so thankful for my good troublemakers, Krista, Patti, and Colleen. Thanks to all of you, and welcome to walking with us on our journey.